Nah, I got something to prove and I ain't never gonna give up. Plenty of juice and I ain't never gonna waste it. Something to do and I ain't never wanna quit it. So come on, get a little bit, I know you wanna play with it.
Coming to you from Studio Iguana Monk down in the Big Dirty, it's the Twisted Pop Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a working artist living in the real world. Please welcome your hosts, Larry Lines and Troy Wingstop.
All right.
Any good quotes?
You got any good quotes?
No.
This is the Twisted Pop Podcast, episode 11. I'm Larry Lyons.
I'm Troy Winscott.
And maybe in some other episode we'll have a quote to start off with.
Don't take any wooden nickels.
Don't take any wooden nickels. Do you have a quote attribution for that?
No.
I mean, who said that? No, you don't know?
George Washington.
George Washington.
Oh, that's not it.
Don't take any wooden nickels. I'm going to start telling people that like it's
Carnegie.
some sort of wise advice.
Carnegie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nickels are made of nickel.
Yeah.
Or they're mixing them with stuff now, right? Steel and nickel. I don't know. Who cares?
Steel
Anyway, this
zinc.
is an I Hate Art segment of the Twisted Pop Podcast. So I guess do you got anything else to say before we dive into it?
Well, how was your week? What'd you do? Anything good?
Oh, I don't know. I put out another podcast.
Oh,
so
that's good.
We had Rebecca Oxley went out.
Yeah, right under the wire.
Yeah, right under the wire. So that was good.
I do that place card like as soon as I got back.
I did a lot of work. Did a lot of IT work.
How'd that go?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about IT. I'm still out. Jury's still out on all that stuff. I don't know whether I'm in yet after 20 years of making a living doing it.
Well, I wasn't sure like when you were going to put out that podcast, and so I kind of mocked it up, like anticipating just some odd schedule, and then I come in last night and I see your text and right after that show, and I was just like, what?
It was a weird production anyway, and like the interview is really good.
I haven't listened to it yet.
I listened to a lot of it. Some of it's really funny, and there's a good chemistry in the room of people talking. So it's a nice podcast. I really liked listening to it.
Yeah, I never know until I go back and listen to them, like how it actually worked.
I'm surprising myself in how much I can listen to me talking, which is really awful. It's
right.
Like I'm gonna watch myself in the movies, right? I like to hear my own voice. It's such a cliche.
It's a little bizarre. So I went out for the first time, like I guess with a lot of other people, like last night, like getting out of the house. I guess a lot of people have not been out of the house since. Yeah, since
the storm.
Yeah.
So what show did you see?
I went to go see Cheetah Chrome and
I saw Cheetah Chrome last year.
The Undead Boys, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess this is supposed to be, was supposed to be a pretty good lineup. Where before, people that I knew had seen the previous shows, and they just but this one they were super excited about. It was like, and of course, the Toasters were there, and it's like a ska band, Satanic Overlords of Rock and Roll, and Killer Hearts, and this show, Cheetah Chrome's Dead Boys, it was kind of like seeing a really good cover band. Like a really good cover band with
the Dead Boys? Because there's a different lineup. There's only one, right?
Yeah. There's only one Dead Boy still alive, right? Cheetah. And like it was like seeing a really, really good sing-along cover band with an original member. It was like really bizarre.
You show up at some dive bar.
It was so much fun.
Eric Clapton isn't there, but like, you know, the percussionist is
Right.
there.
That's kind of it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and they did a really good job. I was like super pumped up like after the show.
Oh, really?
So putting out the place card was just like, oh yeah,
I could do this.
yeah.
That's cool. That's funny. I'm sad I missed it now.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Because a lot of those shows, I don't know what I'm going to get a lot of the time. But
You don't.
Yeah. But still, last year it was fun.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, when I saw them come through again. But anyhow, I guess we'll move right into I Hate Art.
I hate art. Art is stupid. Art is boring. ARTT art.
Okay.
Because it's stupid.
That's right. Okay. Which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
This is what I've got for this I Hate Art segment.
Let me tell you, I don't know what's coming.
Okay.
And you've like kind of prepped me now for like, I don't know, 4-5 days now. And now I'm just like,
I don't know what it is.
I don't know what the...
Okay. So, the I Hate Art, just talking about what an I Hate Art segment is and why I think that it's a good idea to do. And also to explain it, because I realized that I was talking to Aaron Trum, who helps with the music. His music starts and ends the podcast. He was like, I don't know what this podcast is about, or like the I Hate Art segment. And then I realized that, you know, I just expect people to know what the whole idea is. And that I Hate Art segment, I think, is really about that we're doing a podcast where you talk about art. Mm-hmm. And there are people that really hate talking about it. Like, and there's so many people, whether they're artists or regular people, that when you start talking about what art means, they're just like, I fucking hate this discussion. Sometimes I really hate it. I really hate people getting really intellectual about art itself. And I've experienced that enough. Like, you start talking about art, and
Why do you hate the intellectual conversation?
Okay, let's say, for instance, you know, somebody starts talking about what Jackson Pollock means and why it's important.
Yeah.
And you know, if I hear somebody else talking about it, like it's some academic reason why Jackson Pollock's stuff is not just paint being thrown
Right.
at a canvas, I check out. Like, I can check out on that
Sure.
conversation too. Sometimes I can, you know, come up with enough meaning in it for myself to start talking about it. And I hear myself, and you know, then there are people that don't want to talk about it at all. They're just like,
Because it's some kind of asshole move, or it's some kind of exclusion move. Like, I'm just going to do another jazz album, or this is my blue period, to like exclude people, or just some kind of asshole conversation.
it's just an asshole conversation. Okay. I think a lot of people perceive it that way. Sometimes it is, maybe all the time. I don't know. When you're just talking about what art means.
Yeah.
Like, okay, interstellar space. It might as well be, you know, what's his name? The
Carl
saxophone
Sagan?
player.
Oh, no, wait. Interstellar space. I thought we were talking about.
John Coltrane. What the hell? When you listen to Interstellar
Wow,
Space,
that's quite a hop.
I actually had this conversation with somebody not too long ago about interstellar space, which is just John Coltrane and a drummer.
Right.
And it's just crazy, right? It's just some crazy shit. And you know, when you're in music school, you talk about it, and then you go, "What were they going for?" And then you'll sit around and listen to 10 hours of that stuff, and like try to figure out, you know, what they're going for. And you know, 30 years later, you almost feel like it's a trick. Would John Coltrane have listened to it that much? You know, he just went into a studio and they went and did some free jazz, made a lot of noise, right? And then, if you have a conversation about it, you go, well, this was important. And you go, why was it important? And then you're really sort of in a bullshit conversation if you don't acknowledge that there might be bullshit in Jackson Pollock throwing paint at a canvas, or John Coltrane just making shit up. Like, I'm going to make a bunch of noise and put it out. We'll see what happens.
Right.
I mean, you could just as well have been high and just go, You know what? People love me so much right now, I can make a bunch of noise with a drummer and people will buy it. And they'll go, what was he thinking? What was he doing? And it's the same thing with like sort of outside art like Jackson Pollock or, I mean, we could probably name others. There's none are jumping into my head at the moment. But when you actually have that conversation, like you could have more reasonable conversations about stuff that people put a lot of thought into or that makes more sense to talk about. And there's some people that are just going to check out. It's like, I think you're reading too much into it. That doesn't make much sense, right? And I like having the conversation. Like, I like actually talking about the art. I'm just not... and when we're talking about this podcast and talking about art, we're actually lending more meaning to people's efforts on purpose. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, why isn't... the early period of Michael Stovall, just as important as Jackson Pollock's throwing, paint at a canvas, right? So then you're sort of taking things into a different realm, right?
Yeah.
And then you're still turning people off with the conversation. And I feel like the I Hate Art and naming it that way, and after this song that, a young student just was yelling at his teacher because he hated art class.
Yeah.
I think it's funny.
Yeah.
Like it is funny.
It's hilarious.
It is funny. And it is like it's sort of it checks you like on how important you think your own work is. This isn't what we're doing here isn't like the end of the world, right? Or the beginning. Or the beginning. It isn't like we're not going to be. We're no footnote in textbooks outside of a bunch of people made some fucking podcasts and the teens, right? Like this is, and who knows whether it was important or not. It's just more noise added to the din.
Yeah.
But I feel like the acknowledging that with the I Hate Art sort of still invites people to the conversation. Like you can sit in this conversation and go, these guys are full of shit. And they know it.
Yeah, give it a name.
I Hate Art. Right? And that's... anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about in this podcast. And then the other part of it is, why are we interviewing people to begin with? And I think... I mean, I don't know what you think. Do you have any thoughts on the I Hate Art segment? I mean, is it just... anyway, go ahead.
Well, these are discussions that I think should have. It's a good discussion to have. Number one, bullshit. But aside, I think we should be talking about, and we narrow it down some in the podcast mostly to locals, but like people who don't really get the kind of New York style, LA style recognition. And I think that's the whole reason why we kind of put that together, right? Is that we wanted to have the discussion about why our local Houston scene is important.
And then that started spreading.
Yeah.
Because no one's really local to Houston.
Right. Yeah, right.
And then what we're really saying is that there should be an acknowledgement of people's efforts, because it's the same no matter what. Like if you dig far enough into, like you watch a movie, you watch an independent movie,
yeah,
and then it's so easy because we're removed from it to not know that those people have other jobs.
Right.
They have to make a living.
Right.
They're not making money off of independent film.
And that could have been the problem, like when we were growing up, right? Is that we supported the local scene so much that now I feel like we fought for it enough that we ought to talk about it. We defended it, and now we ought to talk about it and why it was important to us. For example, I mean, bands, just a lot of well-known bands didn't come here during the 80s at all.
That's true.
A lot of it. There were some. I mean,
there are a lot of well-known bands that could fill arenas that would always come because they have the arenas that you can fill and people will go.
Right,
but like
But it was surprising that Black Flag showed up here.
Yes.
We had a local scene that we really were into, and music, art, everything that was being written at the time. And there were definitely influences that were coming, from out of the state. But nobody went to Texas for art during that time period. And I think that's kind of been a little-known secret for a long time in Houston specifically, is that nobody came to Houston to do that. But we have a huge art culture here that we feel really personally connected to, and I think that's an important discussion to have around Houston. Even though a lot of people aren't from Houston, originally they bring it here because of the job that it creates and the situation around it, and I think people end up loving it as a result of it.
It's true.
So if that answers the first part of that question,
it's such a big scene, and seems so small. Like it's sort of, I'm surprised all the time if I stick my head out the door and go to a gallery and figure some stuff out, or go to a show, how many people there are that I don't know about. And it used to be a much smaller scene, and you knew what was happening all the time, and which is strange because there's the internet and you feel like you should know a lot more. But there was sort of this, in the 80s anyway, there was an underground communication thing that happened where people just went, oh, there's a band that's going to be here tonight, and you didn't know it until they drove into town, right? Yeah. And then there would be a bunch of phone calls, and everybody would end up at the Axiom or Cabaret Voltaire, and they would go, all right, well, this is what's happening. And there was also sort of the Flophouse idea, where people were exchanging tour routes and phone numbers and contact information. And so you would be on your way to a city, and then you would just call ahead and say, hey, I need a place to stay in Lafayette. And it would just reciprocate. Everybody was doing that across the area and regions. And then every now and then you would get somebody like Black Flag. You're like, I don't know how they got here. I don't know who told them they should come. It doesn't make much sense. But they're really incredible. To see that. You could tell the difference. Between somebody that had been doing this for that long.
And I feel like that still goes on to a greater extent with social media. Like I went to Patrick Madrano and Katie Anderson's show here in the Heights a couple months back, and it was just local celebrity after local celebrity. It's you couldn't walk through the gallery, and it's such a small space over in the Heights there that that gallery, I forget what it's called, but it was a good show, and you just couldn't. You had to wade through, and the next person you were talking to over and over, and everybody showed out, and it was really cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then the second part of your question?
The second part of the thing that I was talking about is why we're doing the interviews and how we're sort of choosing people. And then, from our perspective, it's who we know.
Sure. Who we know. And is there another criteria? Because I have my personal criteria. I don't think we've ever discussed.
No, we didn't. We just throw people in who shows up. What's your personal criteria?
Well, it was a conversation, I think that you and I and Aaron Trum were having one time about success, and it was computer.
Oh yeah.
And it looked like a space age piece of material to me. He kept tapping it with his hand, right? Referring to what he was doing, and it was some kind of array that you guys had talked about, and we were having some kind of conversation about I'm paraphrasing here, and I'm oversimplifying the conversation. I'm not going back till I'm successful. It was almost like a fucking rap fucking that was coming out of the conversation. I thought I don't really know how that works. Because
outside of a Broadway musical,
right? But I know lots of people that are involved in projects that no one even knows who they are.
Yes.
And I thought, well, you don't have to be, up in Lights Academy Awards, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that are doing a lot of really good stuff, that are doing really successful stuff,
I see where you're going now.
don't get acknowledged for any of this. And so I think that's some of my criteria, is to kind of pick those people that have had either multiple successes or multiple failures or both, in whatever chosen art field that they're in, and I want to hear those stories.
Yeah,
and that's kind of how I pick them.
I want to hear the successes and the failures.
Yeah.
I want to hear what you're doing to get by today.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it is. If you're
Right.
big in ditches and playing shows, I want to hear that story. If you've never made a dime and don't intend to.
Yeah.
Because we have these stories about everything Bukowski ever wrote or got interviewed about, right? This is we see Bukowski now, and you go, it's an American writer,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of our American treasures.
Right.
But somewhere back there was just a drunk that was an asshole.
Some embarrassing shit.
Some embarrassing shit, right? And he turned this into gold, right?
Yeah.
Some really great stories, and but most of the stories outside of making $1 million or being put in a museum somewhere,
Uh-huh.
right? They just sound like, man, you should have fucking given up,
Right. Right. I mean, it kind of, I kind of feel like when I hear these stories from really successful people, you don't hear about all those things, but people that are just kind of medium level,
yeah,
or lower in what we consider just kind of squeaking by, day-to-day kind of stuff, like one project away from being homeless, like we all are, but they all kind of have the same success story and the same failures, and
I'm hearing things differently lately too. Like when I hear successful people talking about their trajectory. I started out here as a child, and then that's all I did when I was a kid was write this stuff.
Right.
And I don't necessarily meet those kids. And I believe that there are writers that were like, yeah, I wrote a lot when I was young, but I feel like it becomes part of the mythology, I started out and all I did was write, right? And then I wrote until I was in college, and then I wrote some more, and there are people like that. I mean, there's definitely people that are doing that, but I feel like it's just part of the mythology. There's other things you were doing too.
Sure.
You went to school, you had your first girlfriend or boyfriend, and
right.
you tried to pick up the guitar and you couldn't play it. You thought about getting into science, and and you're like, ah, shit, I'm just not that interested in that. And then somebody acknowledged some part of something that was interesting, maybe 3 or 4 things that you did, and it just you're just like, oh well, I can write another story, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's believable as a mythology when you're talking to somebody that's got some stellar success behind them, and
Right.
a couple $1 million and some bestsellers. But when you're talking to somebody that it doesn't have that kind of stellar success, you're like, well, during the day I'm I'm a medical assistant, and I'm in this band.
Yeah.
Band's way more important, but I support myself and my family as a medical assistant or
Right.
whatever I do.
Right.
You don't hear it the same way.
Right.
It's like, well, you're not really that consequential. But even the blog, and this is sort of where we talked about this quite a bit. My blog posts about some of this stuff were acknowledging independent music, right?
Right.
And there's a lot more acknowledgement for independent music, but at this point, but it's still the same. Everybody's making a living doing something else.
Right. And somehow, creativity works its way to the top as the more important thing. And so maybe, that's what I'm looking personally out of this podcast, is to help spur me along.
to give me something to do,
Right.
And then remember why I'm doing it.
Right, and that it's really easy to get surmounted by life and not do anything, right? And so, what is it that's going to keep pushing me along? So I think that hopefully that is going to be the inspiration to continue to do the podcast and see what we can get as much out of it as we can possibly get. And then number two, to help spur me along, it reminds me of, and I think this is why I like Iggy Pop so much in his storytelling about his success and failures. He includes a lot of failure in it. In the documentary, Gimme Danger.
I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, it's really good. I saw it at the MFA on the big screen. It was really good. And he tells these stories about the early days when they just wanted a band and they just pretended like they were in a band, but they hadn't actually picked up any instrument. This is the gist I got out of it. They hadn't really picked up.
That's an acceptable punk rock story too,
right? And then,
in the end, it's like if you wouldn't accept that story about them, right? Steve Howe pretended to play guitar for 3 years and they just picked it up,
right? Or the turmoil that went behind the scenes of the Eagles.
Oh yeah.
All that crazy crap.
Yeah.
Of the end fighting and just all that kind of crap.
And and I've been in bands like that, but it's not nearly as interesting, right? Like as as we're not the Eagles, right? We're just some assholes that put together a band. I was in a band with a guy a long time ago, and there was a lot of infighting. He's the singer. And he would say stuff every time there would be some disagreements that turned into fights. He would be like, I could see the headline tomorrow. Band that's never played gig breaks up.
Yeah, right. Totally.
Now that's an Onion headline, right?
Artist who never picks up brush is never successful, right? Yeah, totally.
Artist who's never made a painting gives it up.
Yeah. Gives it all up. Yeah, that's hilarious. So... It just the pretend, helped them spur it along. And I saw last night, I saw these kids hopping themselves up over this show and probably never really got together to practice.
Oh, you're one of the bands.
No, it was these kids. It was just these kids at the show that were just really hopped up on their own shit.
Oh, okay.
And
I can actually remember being like that too.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's that. These are the stories that kind of.
I couldn't play a full song all the way through, right. And it was
right.
Would be in a band. Woo! Naming the band before you can play a song.
Totally.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah.
So I think that's. Was there more to that second part?
Well, I mean, right now, obviously, we're sort of interviewing people that we know more often than not, and it's sort of branching out from here. We're getting further away from our smaller group. Rebecca was we've known for a long time, so obviously that's we've known all these people a long time, but I feel like now we're starting to branch out into people we don't know. And what's been surprising about interviewing the people we know is how many freaking things I just don't know about them. Yeah. Which surprises me, what even about what they think about what they're doing, which I was sure that I knew in some cases. But it's also, as we're moving forward, I'm more interested in that sort of working artist dynamic. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not your main thing, right? I always used to say, after going to Berkeley, you just spent all this money on learning stuff, and it's any asshole can play the guitar, right? There's people working on farms that go home and they play the guitar.
Right.
It's but the world doesn't run on music.
Right.
As much as you would like to think that it's that important, you're going to save the world with the song, you really aren't doing anything. You're really inspiring people. So what is it? What is that thing that makes people do it? I don't think that we're actually I tried to ask that question directly once in one of the interviews, and then I realized it's sort of a useless question. Why do you do it?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, you really, you're asking, how long is a piece of string? It's just sort of a useless question. You can't answer it.
Right.
But it's so interesting
because you want to do it more.
Yeah,
you want to do it more than what you're doing.
Yeah,
I guess is what it comes down to.
And you can be, you can get to the point where you're lucky enough that that's all you're doing with your life.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely. Like
right.
that's
right.
like, so you organize your life, and how do people organize their lives? That's sort of what I'm interested in moving forward. Here's a story, sort of as an example, is if you watch the Iron Maiden documentary. I don't know if you've ever watched it.
The one where he's piling it around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that.
Yeah.
I liked it.
And it was the thing that they didn't focus as much on in the documentary was this segment, the NPR Marketplace. They do a Saturday morning marketplace where they're, it's longer stories.
Uh-huh.
And they had Bruce Dickinson on, and they were talking about him piloting and what his reasons for doing it, because they had done some reunion tour in the 90s, and they were at the end of the tour. They'd been out there for 9 months or a year or however long that they're out there doing it, and they gave him a check, and it wasn't even six figures, right? He was like, what? Just took all this time away from my family. I've got bills to pay, got stuff piling up, and what am I doing? And he asked to see the balance sheet for the tour to see where all the money went, and the pilot was getting paid more than he was, and he was like, I'm going to go get my pilot's license, and that's why he did it. And he's flies commercially, right? Yeah. I'm sure there was more desire to it than just the money, but Bruce Dickinson has to think about how he's going to make a living.
That's
right?
crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, who am I? Like, I'm not.
Right.
Who am I if Bruce Dickinson has to think about how he's making a living?
Right.
And then if you get into some more recent stories, like Martin Scorsese trying to fund his last movie, and apparently it wasn't like a cut and dry thing. Like he actually had to work for the money. Like it wasn't like, hey, I've got an idea for a movie. I'm Scorsese.
Right.
That's how we perceive stuff like that. But then I found out like that it was difficult, and he had to put up a bunch of his own money. Like he couldn't get just investors. Mm-hmm. No one was like.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
To think about it like that.
So we're all, and we were talking about this earlier, like about the confetti. There's no walking into the room at some point after you've accomplished something, and then the confetti falls from the sky, and that's it. It's over. Like, and I think he's already gotten a Lifetime Achievement Award from somebody, right? Mm-hmm. And he's still working to get this thing. I'm sure he's not poor. Like that's
right. That conception, right?
Yeah. But you have this idea that somebody like him can just go, I'm going to make a movie,
right?
And there would be people who wants to invest in this. I pick you. You can invest in this movie.
You got a good face, kid.
I've known you for a while. I owe you a favor. You can invest in my movie. Right? And that's Bruce Dickinson, right? Like Martin Scorsese, they have to think about this stuff. Yeah. So when we're talking about independent artists and whether it's music or visual, whatever the hell it is, or even making a movie, you're putting yourself out there. Like there's so much to do to get out there and do it, and it's amazing that people are still motivated to do it. If you think about it, just on the surface of we're creating something, then when
it would be just much easier just to do nothing.
Yeah, if your motivation was money, right, it would be easier to do. But that isn't it. Like it's obviously not it. Unless we're talking about the motivation being money because we believe the mythology that we're going to be rock stars.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when we were having that conversation. That we've been, that I think that line is in Fight Club is probably super accurate. How we've been sold that we're all going to be movie stars and rock stars.
And then there's this idea that like. That if you aren't a rock star, like that that, or like you're talking to
Oh
somebody.
man, I hate reality TV for this.
Yes.
I hate it. Anyway, go ahead.
Like if you're not.
How's that
like,
for I hate art?
Yeah.
How about what's not art?
What's not art? And
And
what
what's
it
not
is.
reality.
I mean, if there's also the case to be made for it, you hate it. You know what I mean? So what is that saying too?
Yeah.
But I forgot.
I avoid it.
Yeah.
And so now when I run across clips and stuff, I've stepped all over that. But like now when I see like clips of reality shows, it's so alien that I just pull away from it like immediately. I have this like reaction, this physical reaction, like click.
Yeah.
Off.
There's also like this thing like where we examine the unicorn stories. Like there's 10,000 people in the line.
Yeah, that's it too. Yeah.
Like where we really tell ourselves, that guy that did the unicorn story, all he did was persist and make sure that he was putting out a quality product, right? And then somebody handed him $1 million. But those they don't exist, right?
Right.
And that's a lottery. It's a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
It's not happening.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, this is that's why I wanted to have this conversation about why we're interviewing people, and that's it, because we know a lot of working artists, and everybody's there, and you're talking about it, but behind the scenes, right? Like
and dispelling part of that big myth.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
I'm gonna go do some art.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Twisted Pop Podcast. For show notes, go to twistedpop.com/podcast. Merchandise at bigmyth.com. That's big-myth.com. In association with nquit.com. Until next time, this is the Twisted Pop Podcast.